Hi, I'm Peter J. Ray. Welcome. Today's topic is Resalest Remarkable Books number 72. The first book today is Osceola and the Great Seminole War, A Struggle for Justice and Freedom by Tom Hatch, 2012. This is an outstanding book. It's the story of Osceola, the Creek Indian and Alabama native who became the great Seminole Indian who led his people in a long war against the U.S. Army, fighting to stay in Florida and keep their African American Seminoles escaped slaves. Benjamin Hawkins, who was a U.S. agent to the Creek Indians in Alabama, was requested to return to the capital. In other words, Washington, well, not Washington yet, well, by George Washington, so that would have been probably Philadelphia. And so he said he would, quote, God willing, and the creek don't rise, meaning the Creek Indians don't rise up. This is how that expression comes. You've heard the expression. You ask somebody if they can do something, they say, well, God willing, and the creek don't rise, and you think it's a river, but it's not. He was saying that he could come if the Creek Indians didn't have a rebellion, didn't rise up. So this is a wonderful book. It was wonderful that this book was written, and it's about the tough swamp war that was fought in Florida, in the swamps of Florida, the U.S. Army against the Seminole Indians. It was very tough on the U.S. Army soldiers and obviously the Seminole Indians. God bless Osceola, a man who served his people well. My father lived in Florida for a year when he was a boy because he had a year or a winter. Anyway, because he'd been sick, and he mentioned the Seminole Indians, and they won the war. The Seminole Indians, it was a long fight, and they wanted to move them out of Florida, and some of them moved, but in the end, the U.S. finally gave up and allowed the final Seminole Indians to stay in Florida. I believe their descendants are still there, so that was one of the. That was interesting, partly because of the, so tough fighting in the swampy areas. They just were very tough on the soldiers. And they finally gave up. This Osceola, boy, he was really determined, and wonderful book. I think there's a college or a university in Florida called the Seminoles, named after the Seminole Indians. So this is another very, very good, interesting book about the... this is part of the war that was fought by European Americans against American Indians for what became the United States, in this case, Florida. And Osceola, very interesting guy, great hero. This is a wonderful book. Really enjoyed it. The next book is Let Me Tell You a Story, A Lifetime in the Game by Red Auerbach and John Feinstein, 2004. Very good book. It's the story of the man who built the greatest NBA franchise, the Boston Celtics, who have won the most NBA championships. I thought the best part was the reference to Joe Lapchick, former Cleveland Rosenblum, from whom Auerbach came up with his victory cigar tradition when the Celtics had a game in hand. Yeah, they don't do that anymore. But Auerbach, who was the coach, near the end of the game, if he felt the Celtics were going to win, he'd light a cigar, which in a way was not very respectful. And nowadays, with no smoking rules, I don't think they would do this. But I remember, he's back in the 70s when he was doing this. So the guys he talks about in this book, Bill Russell, who was, really his biggest help in all the championships that he won. That Red Auerbach won. Russell was his star player. Bob Cousy, whom some like to mention, and there's a famous clip at the end of an NBA Finals game, and I think it was the decisive game. Cousy was dribbling the ball out and trying to keep the ball away from the other guys, and using only one hand. So supposedly this is proof that the NBA in the old days wasn't that great, or the players weren't that great. John Havlicek, Larry Bird, Len Bias, who died shortly after being drafted, never got to play for the Celtics. Havlicek was the star in the 70s, Bird in the 80s, and or as I like to say, Larry's Bird. That was my nickname in the Philippines, Larry's Bird. Red Auerbach, the Celtics have won more NBA championships than any other team, and it really comes back to Red Auerbach, who won most of them. And of course, he's gone now. But this is a really good NBA history book, and I really enjoyed it. John Feinstein is a tremendous sports author. The next book is Zachary Taylor, Soldier, Planter, Statesman of the Old Southwest by Jack Bauer, 1985. This book was not great. I was, to be honest, I was disappointed. The author was anti-Zachary Taylor, and it's hard to know Taylor. Actually, he's one of the presidents that's very difficult to study, and this book didn't help. Bauer wrote this quote, "Taylor was and remains an enigma. But for me, he's a great hero of the Mexican War that brought in the U.S. Southwest." Yeah, the thing is, Zachary Taylor, his home was burned in the Civil War because his son became I believe a Confederate general. His home was burned, and that was a tremendous loss for historians. So they're just, and in the early days of the United States, they weren't thinking about about history and saving things. A lot of things were thrown out. We were a poor country back then. Zachary Taylor was one of the early presidents. He was elected in 1848, served only a year and 8 months, and he got sick and died in office. But he was the great general of the Mexican War that brought in the Southwest in the war with Mexico, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. So anyway, Zachary Taylor, God bless Zachary Taylor, a man who served his country well. The next book is Heritage of Buddha, the story of Siddhartha Gautama by Selina Luzan, 1953. This is a very, very interesting book. The story of Lord Buddha, one of the great saints in world history. He was born in India. He was born an Indian prince around 500 B.C. His mother died at his birth. His father, the king, tried to shelter him from suffering. He'd heard a prophecy that his son would become an ascetic, and he didn't want that, actually. He wanted him to be the king. As a young man, Siddhartha was debauched. He got into drinking and womanizing. He fathered a child with a prostitute, according to this book. And he got married and fathered a son, but left his responsibilities to seek God in the mountains. He lived with renunciants who stuck thorns in their bodies and wore crowns of thorns. Now, these fellows this was their way to try to become liberated, to evolve. You could say burning bad karma. Through meditation, Siddhartha attained union with God, then became a teacher, and reunited with his wife, and by this time the son that he fathered was 8 years old. There's a reference to the ancient Greeks in this book, Plato and Homer, and an imminent invasion by the Persians and Darius. There's a quote, "All that we are is a result of what we have thought. He who has tasted the sweetness of solitude and tranquility is free from fear and from sin. Rouse thyself, do not be idle." This is a quote from Lord Buddha. "Follow the law of virtue. The virtuous rest in bliss in this world and in the next. He who always greets and constantly reveres the aged will know increase." One of the renunciants in this book that Lord Buddha met would bite tree roots to hurt his teeth. So they were intentionally trying to hurt themselves. Siddhartha left his son to become a better father. He left when his wife was mad at him. Anyway, interesting book. And Lord Buddha, one of the great people in history. And of course, you have millions of Asians who've been Buddhist ever since. The Chinese, the Japanese, Southeast Asians. And of course, in India, he was in India, and you could say he was a Hindu. But Buddhism really was helpful for Hinduism and strengthening it. Like Buddha was like one of the Christian saints who came along to revive Christianity, like St. Francis of Assisi, when Christianity became very weak, and Hinduism also had the same problem. And Lord Buddha came along, and wow, really something. So he went off to meditate, practice yoga meditation, and became a saint, and then a great teacher. And he taught people to be peaceful and to revere animals, because this is people have been killing and eating animals, and it's not right, because we believe. Many in the church I'm in, which is actually based in India, we believe that their animals have souls, and so this kind of led to, or it was a major factor in Indians becoming vegetarian and not eating beef, and so amazing. There are other books on Lord Buddha, an amazing man. He's a historical person. I was talking to a friend who was a Chinese Filipino about reincarnation. Of course, Lord Buddha also taught that we've lived before, that we've lived on this earth, and we die and go to heaven, and we come back and are reborn again, and we do this many times. I believe this, and eventually, we don't come back to this earth. We stay in heaven forever when we become perfect, when we become saints, when we give up all the desires that we have. We reincarnate because we want to come back. Anyway, I told this student at Resalest, who was a Chinese Filipino. He said, "Oh, I don't believe in reincarnation." And I said, "Well, yeah, but your ancestors did. Many generations. He's Chinese, and the Chinese Filipinos, well, they're Catholic Christian generally, because that's the religion in the Philippines. But the Chinese people were Buddhist for more than 2,000 years. So Lord Buddha, one of the great saints that's sent by God, or to help us, this is how God loves us, to show us the way out of this very troubled world and the world of suffering. Lord Buddha showed the way through meditation, through right actions. We can, and through service work, through kindness, and through meditation, we can become one with God and end our suffering and be happy forever. Amazing book. And Lord Buddha, one of the greatest people in history. The next book is John Tyler by Gary May, 2008. This is a short book, 151 pages. John Tyler was the 10th U.S. president. He assumed the presidency in 1841, when President William Henry Harrison died shortly, a month after being inaugurated. This is a pretty good book. I wanted to get a little better understanding of our nation's 10th president, John Tyler, a man who helped bring Texas and Hawaii into the United States and served most of William Henry Harrison's term. He fathered 16 children. Oh boy, and unfortunately sided with the Confederacy in the Civil War. So that's why they called him the traitor president. He was near the end of his life, and he was actually elected to the Confederate Congress. So this actually, it was treason, because he'd been president, and now he supported this rebellion to split the United States and to break off the South into a new country. And then he actually died. I don't believe he served, so he died early in the Civil War. He's actually also the great-great-grandfather of my college friend, Ginny Tyler. So this is a book about a very interesting American president who's controversial, but I wouldn't blame him for what he did, because a lot of good folks in the South, they supported the Confederacy because they were from the South. Very interesting. The next book is Collapse: How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed by Jared Diamond, 2005. Wow, what a book. 525 pages. And when I read this book, I felt like it turned me into an environmentalist. The author, Jared Diamond, writes about Montana, Easter Island, Pitcairn Island in the Pacific Ocean, the Anasazi American Indians, the Mayan Indians in Mexico, the Vikings, Greenland, New Guinea, Southeast Asia, Japan, Rwanda and East Africa, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic in the Caribbean, China, and Australia. And so he asked this question: why have civilizations collapsed? Because we know that civilizations have come and gone. What happened? Why did everything fall apart? And Diamond's main point is that we need to take care of the earth, the soil, the water, plants, animals, and air for the health and happiness of all today and in the future. Otherwise, disaster will come. Simple living, plain living, high thinking. So that's very interesting because, he believes or makes the case that some of these societies, the population would grow, and then everybody wants stuff. So then the I believe in Easter Island, that of course that's a small area that they ran out of room, and they cut down all the trees, and then they eventually starved. There were too many people, and then they had warfare. So we do. So this would support the environmentalist position. He also is the author of Guns, Germs, and Steel. He's a real smart guy. His books are not easy to read, but this is some really good history, and where he's trying to figure out what happened. These people that disappeared, the Vikings disappeared. What happened to them? The people in Greenland and now in Haiti. This is in the Caribbean. Very interesting book. The next book is The Eastern Stars: How Baseball Changed the Dominican Town of San Pedro de Macorís by Mark Kurlansky, 2010. This is an interesting book about this small country in the Caribbean which has produced so many baseball stars in the United States. Guys like some of the guys that I support. Rico Cardi played for Cleveland, Joaquin Andujar, Alfredo Griffin, Pedro Guerrero, George Bell, Julio Franco, he played for Cleveland, Tony Fernandez, Sammy Sosa, Armando Benitez, Fernando Tatis, Alfonso Soriano, Robinson Cano, and so forth. The story of a poor sugar town in the Dominican Republic. I developed a very strong interest in that country, La República Dominicana, when Rico Cardi and Julio Franco played for the Cleveland Indians back in the 1970s. So they have dreams of wealth for the poor. This is these guys, they're hoping it's a poor country, real poor, materially poor, and sugarcane, that's been the main business for the country. Sugarcane, of course, sugar prices are real low. So if these guys, if they make it, it's a real rags to riches story. And apparently they have talent, and baseball is the game that they know and love down there. And you had some of them who've done, and today there's a huge number of guys from the Dominican Republic playing Major League Baseball, and star players and regular players. Very interesting book. The next book is Big Hair and Plastic Grass, A Funky Ride Through Baseball in America in the Swingin' 70s by Dan Epstein, 2010. It's another baseball book. This was my era when I was a boy back in the 70s. The Oakland A's, strong teams, Cincinnati Reds, New York Yankees, Catfish Hunter, Pete Rose, Reggie Jackson. Free agency, colorful uniforms, artificial turf, mustaches, America Changing, Burt Campaneris, Johnny Bench, Billy Martin, Bill North, all these guys. Baseball changed. There was the dramatic changes, and our country was changing. The Oakland A's were the team that revolutionized uniforms by having the first colorful uniforms that were yellow and green. They won 3 championships, so they wore, and the guys all had mustaches. I thought they were really cool. And they started having artificial turf, that's what the title. Actually, Oscar Gamble's on the cover of the book, who played for Cleveland. He was African American guy with a big afro and what they called an afro, and his hair, he'd have his hair out. He was a good player, and he's gone now. God bless Oscar Gamble. Interesting book, and this was nostalgic for me because this is when I became a baseball fan in the 1970s. The next book is Cleopatra, A Life by Stacy Schiff, 2010. This is an outstanding book. The story of the famous Cleopatra. But we know of her, this leader, or you'd say a queen in Egypt. However, she was Greek. She was Greek and the queen of Egypt not long before the time of Christ, early BC. She had boyfriends, including Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The famous Julius Caesar, the most famous emperor of the Roman Empire. Her downfall came when Octavian, also known as Augustus Caesar, defeated Mark Antony in their power struggle for the Roman Empire. And that meant that her downfall as well, since Mark Antony had become her boyfriend. Euripides, an ancient Greek author, wrote this, quote, "One loyal friend is worth 10,000 relatives." After her death, Egypt became part of the Roman Empire. Alexandria was nicer than Rome then. She was part of the Ptolemaic dynasty, descendants of Ptolemy, the Greek general who claimed Egypt after Alexander the Great's death. So it's associated with Alexander the Great created a huge Greek empire, and then after he died, his generals divided it up, and Ptolemy, one of his generals, took Egypt, and apparently Cleopatra was a descendant of him. Egypt was a very wealthy country back then. Cleopatra's life was filled with politics, power, wealth, and betrayal. She was strong, intelligent, and beautiful. She visited Caesar in Rome, Julius Caesar. Joseph J. Ellis, Ron Chernow, and John Meacham praised this book. These are three famous American historians. Very interesting. And it was also troubling. There was all this, it's kind of sickening, actually. All this, was wealth and power and betrayal, and the luxury was, overwhelming, and slavery, so crazy stuff. But, Cleopatra is really, she's a very famous person in history. I think partly because of the movie with Elizabeth Taylor that came out. So this is a really good history book. I really enjoyed it, and an interesting person. And she was a powerful woman in the ancient world, Cleopatra. The next book is The Kingdom of Matthias, a story of sex and salvation in 19th century America. Paul E. Johnson and Sean Willents, 1994. I read this book for my a history class at Cleveland State University, American history. It's the story of Robert Matthews and Elijah Pearson of Matthews, also known as Elijah Pearson, also known as Matthias, and a crazy church created by this charismatic individual. And so Elijah Pearson was a good, weak, rich guy, and Matthews was a poor, bad guy. It shows how much trouble religious people can get into in their ignorance, pride, and character defects. The elements of the book include class, gender, and race, the market revolution, rich do-gooders, the poor resentment against a rich woman. I thought that the book should not have been written because it's such a kind of a depressing story of basically a religious leader who was no good, who got some people to support him, and there were bad things that happened, unfortunately. This is one of the reasons people today, so many people today they don't believe in God, and they don't believe in, they don't want to have anything to do with religion because of religious leaders who are not good. And then they think, it turns them off. It's very sad because, to me, the most important thing in life is God or Divine Mother, who loves us and does exist. And if we cut God out of our life, or we have no religion in our life, no spirituality, I think we're in trouble. And I think this is why we're so troubled today. The world is so troubled. The next book is Joan of Arc, A Life Transfigured by Catherine Harrison, 2014. Oh, I love this book. Very interesting. One of the famous saints in the Catholic Church and really in world history, Joan of Arc. She was born in 1412 in Domremy in Lorraine, France, 150 miles east of Paris. She died in 1431 in Rouen, France at age 19. Burned alive at the stake, convicted of heresy and witchcraft. In 1429, for 2 years, Joan was a leader in the French army, fighting to drive the English out of France. Interesting. Eventually, she was captured by the English. Joan said that God was using her to liberate France. In 1456, her conviction was nullified, of course, after she had died. In 1909, she was beatified by the Catholic Church, and in 1920, she was canonized as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. What an interesting life. How God used a 17-year-old girl to liberate France in the 1400s. Yeah, she was betrayed by politicians, but I think this kind of shows that you can be a Christian and also go to war in a righteous war. Because here, Joan of Arc, is considered one of the great saints in history, and she was a warrior, and she was just a girl, 17-year-old girl, and she did play a role in helping France drive the English out of France, and then she was betrayed by politicians. So this is an extremely interesting story. It was very tragic, her life, but actually, you could say also inspiring, because we're all going to die, and her life really meant something, and she inspired people to believe in God and to live a righteous life, and in her case to fight a righteous war, because otherwise we'll be slaves. War is not always bad. There are times when it's good to fight for the freedom of your country. Very interesting book, very inspiring. And it's amazing, really amazing. One of the amazing saints in world history, one of the greatest people in history. The next book is Old Tippecanoe, William Henry Harrison and His Time by Freeman Cleaves, 1939. This book has 343 pages. Very good book. One of my favorite American presidents, Ohio native, historian, intellectual warrior, the man who faced Tecumseh and who won the famous battles of Tippecanoe, Indiana, and the Thames River, Ontario, in Canada. Great Indian fighter who made the Midwest safe for American settlers. He was elected in the 1840 U.S. presidential campaign, which was the funnest ever. Really fun. He's a very interesting guy and kind of very much a forgotten guy because he only served 1 month in office. But yeah, he was a warrior and he was an intellectual, very, very knowledgeable guy. And he was the guy who fought American Indians. See, the thing is, it is very tragic. Terribly tragic what happened to American Indians, their downfall. But the United States would not exist today if there had not been Indian fighters, men who fought Indians, because the Indians were warriors, and the United States would not exist today without Indian fighters, because the Indians, they did not just give up their land without fighting. They fought hard, and William Henry Harrison was one of the people who fought them and defeated them. And so you have to give them credit, have respect, because guys who risked their lives, and many of them died. A lot of American settlers died because they were killed by Indians who didn't want them moving into their land, naturally. But folks were very grateful to William Henry Harrison and other Indian fighters who made it safe, because you had settlers moving into areas. They were afraid of Indian attacks. Somebody had to fight the Indians to make it safe for Americans to move into as our country moved westward. Very interesting book. The next book is Cobb by Al Stump, 1994. Very interesting book, the biography of Ty Cobb, the tremendous baseball player who played from 1905 to 1928, mostly for the Detroit Tigers, 2 years for the Philadelphia Athletics. Lifetime batting average of .367. Oh my gosh, nobody's going to beat that record. Most years, the batting leader isn't that high. He stole home plate 32 times. Incredible. Georgia native, his mother accidentally murdered his father right before his career started. Yeah, his mom, I think, had a guy who was cheating on his dad, and his father came home and surprised them, and then she didn't know who the father. He was kind of snooping around. She thought it was someone breaking into the house, and she accidentally shot and killed him. So that was very, very hard on Ty Cobb, losing his dad right when his Major League Baseball career started. His specialty was getting on base and advancing through stolen bases. Yeah. Now, this book indicates, and I think it's not true, that he was a miserable man who seemed to need to fight everyone, became very wealthy. And according to this book, a terrible husband, a terrible father. He lost 3 World Series, very wealthy and famous, stolen base king until Lou Brock. Now, this book, others have disputed this, that Cobb was not, This is the opinion of Al Stump, who actually gave Ty Cobb a very bad name because of this book. And other authors have said, no, he was actually, people liked him. He was a fighter, and he was a competitor, but he was not a terrible person. So this kind of, Al Stump kind of unfairly castigated Ty Cobb. It appears we're out of time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you find a good book to read. God bless all the authors who write amazing history books and other books, because it's really something what they do, and every book is really a gift. So anyway, God bless you. Take care, and I'll see you next time.